Margaret Hayes had lived alone for nearly 6 years. After her husband passed, the silence in their cottage deepened. The house was filled with memories, framed photos on the mantel, worn cookbooks on the shelf, the ticking of a grandfather clock that never missed a beat. Every morning, Margaret set 2 plates out of habit. Every evening, she washed only 1. But on an unusually crisp October morning, something shifted. She sat staring at the empty chair across from her, the eggs on her plate untouched. A sudden ache wrapped around her chest, and she couldn't quite name it. Not loneliness, she was used to that. This was something deeper, a kind of pull. Without knowing why, she put on her coat, picked up her keys and walked out the door. Her feet carried her across town, past the bakery, the church, and finally to the old city orphanage. She hadn't been there since volunteering one Christmas 10 years ago. The building hadn't changed much, still grey, still humming with the quiet chaos of children's voices inside. Margaret walked through the gate, not knowing what she was looking for, only knowing something was pulling her forward. Inside, rooms buzzed with laughter and crying. Volunteers moved swiftly between cribs and playpens. Then, in a quiet corner near a window, she saw him. A baby boy sat alone in a bassinet, not crying, just watching. His skin was deep and flawless, but his eyes stopped, her cold, clear blue, glass-like, piercing, unnatural, beautiful. A cloth bracelet circled his wrist with 2 stitched letters, Ka. "What's his name?" she asked a worker nearby. "No name, no family. Left here 2 weeks ago." Margaret stared at the boy again. "I'll take him," she whispered. Margaret had never made such a sudden decision in her life. The words had escaped her lips before she fully understood them. But once spoken, they echoed through her, loud and certain. The staff at the orphanage stared at her, surprised. "Ma'am, he doesn't have legal documentation. It could take months," one warned. "I'll wait," she replied calmly. And she did. For 5 long months, she filled out paperwork, attended hearings, sat in courtrooms, and answered endless questions from social workers. Still, every weekend she returned to visit the boy, who remained tucked in his corner of the nursery, watching the world with those haunting eyes. He never cried, he never laughed, but when she entered the room, his gaze followed her, as if he knew. Margaret gave him a name, Cairo. It came to her in a dream, a word whispered by a voice she didn't recognize. She woke up and wrote it down, and when she spoke it aloud beside the baby's crib, he blinked once, slowly, as if accepting it. Finally, on a rainy Thursday morning, she was handed a stack of papers and a signature line. The ink on her pen barely had time to dry before she scooped him into her arms. At home, the cottage felt fuller. She rearranged the second bedroom, painted the walls light blue, and filled it with storybooks and hand-knit blankets. Cairo adjusted quickly, uncannily so. He rarely fussed, slept through the night, and followed Margaret's every movement like a silent shadow. By age 1, he recognized letters. At 2, he repeated sounds like a parrot. At 3, he took apart a clock and reassembled it, perfectly. Margaret watched it all with quiet amazement. Something about this boy wasn't just special, it was otherworldly. By the time Cairo turned 6, Margaret had read every parenting book she could find, but none explained him. He wasn't just intelligent, he was different. He didn't play like other kids. He preferred puzzles, maps, and sound patterns. One day, Margaret found him silently watching a documentary about lost civilizations, completely still, absorbing everything. But the strangest thing began with his dreams. At first, it was mumbling. Then, full phrases, whispered clearly in his sleep. The words didn't sound like gibberish. They were structured, melodic, rhythmic. One night, she stood by his bed and recorded a whisper repeated again and again. Kafaro ama, Kafaro ama. In the morning, she played it back. Cairo stared at the phone for a long time before saying, "I don't know what it means, but it feels old, like it's been with me forever." Margaret reached out to a linguistics professor at the local university. When he heard the recording, he leaned back slowly. "This sounds like fragments of an ancient African dialect, possibly from a coastal tribe in West Africa. That language is believed to be extinct. Where did he learn this?" Margaret had no answer. Cairo's bracelet, still wrapped around his wrist, became his constant companion. Its faded letters, Ka, remained untouched. "I think it matters," he told Margaret. "I don't know why yet." At 8, he started asking the real questions. Where do I come from? Why are my eyes different? What does my bracelet mean? Margaret told him everything she knew, which wasn't much. But she promised, "When you're ready to search, I'll help you." Cairo nodded. But instead of searching outward, he dove inward, into books, history, codes, and maps. He wasn't just looking for identity, he was preparing for something. By age 12, Cairo had mastered basic programming. By 15, he was creating encryption systems that some college professors couldn't understand. He interned remotely for non-profits, building secure databases to protect activist data in developing countries. But at home, he was still just Cairo, Margaret's boy. Quiet, focused, never without his bracelet. One snowy afternoon, while researching archived immigration records, Cairo noticed a strange document embedded with a barely visible seal, so faint it almost vanished under the scanner. He zoomed in and gasped. The symbol etched on that document, it was the same as the one faintly stamped into the plastic bead on his bracelet. Chills ran down his spine. Digging deeper, he found references to something called the Kadura Initiative, a now-defunct political program from a small West African nation called Vantara. The initiative had vanished after a failed coup nearly 2 decades ago. A name stood out: Kamari Ayatu, former revolutionary leader, exiled, rumored dead. Cairo ran facial recognition software, comparing a childhood photo of himself with a young Kamari. The result, 92% genetic match. Cairo's hands trembled. Kamari had one infant son, rumored to be hidden during the collapse. No one knew where he went, until now. Who had brought him to the orphanage? Why was he left with a hidden symbol tied to a fallen regime? He had more than questions now. He had evidence. That evening at dinner, Margaret noticed his silence. "You okay, love?" Cairo looked up, eyes haunted. "I found something about where I come from, something big." She didn't ask for details. Not yet. She just reached out and held his hand. In her heart, she already knew. His life was never ordinary, and now something powerful was calling him back. Cairo didn't sleep that night. Everything had changed. The seal, the match, Kamari Ayatu. The truth was no longer out of reach. It was right in front of him. He stared at the bracelet for hours, running his thumb over the faded letters and the plastic bead. Could it hold more? The next morning, with Margaret's blessing, he booked a consultation with an international investigator. Together they flew to Geneva, where sealed records from the Kadura Initiative had been archived by human rights groups after Vantara's collapse. In a secured lab, Cairo handed the bracelet to a technician. "You really think something's inside this bead?" she asked. "I don't think. I know." She pried it open under a microscope and gasped. "There's a chip inside. Encrypted. What do you want to do?" Cairo stared at the screen. "Crack it. It took 2 hours." Cairo watched the code unfold like petals. The tech looked at him, astonished. "You built half the tools we're using right now. You're unlocking your own past." A file opened. Inside were birth records, evacuation logs, smuggled letters, and one grainy video. A man appeared on screen, sharp eyes, commanding presence. "Kamari Ayatu. If this is found, I am gone. But this child is my legacy. His name is me." The video cut off. Cairo sat frozen. DNA-tied humanitarian funds were attached to the chip. Offshore accounts. Plans to rebuild if peace ever returned. All connected to him. He called Margaret from the archive room. "I don't know what to do with this," he whispered. "You were never too much for me," she said softly. "And maybe your father trusted you with this because he believed you'd do more with it than he ever could." Cairo looked at the screen. He hadn't been abandoned. He'd been entrusted. Back in Geneva, Cairo sat alone with the open file. The microchip had revealed more than a name. It held everything: secret humanitarian routes, safe house coordinates, even education blueprints. His father's voice echoed in the recording, confident, passionate, desperate. Kamari Ayatu hadn't just been a political figure. He had been a man with vision, trying to protect his son while preserving a future for his country. And now, that vision was Cairo's to carry. He returned to the hotel and spent the entire night reading. Margaret stayed by his side, watching quietly, knitting, sipping tea. When Cairo finally looked up, his eyes were red, not from sadness, but clarity. "I know what I have to do," he said. He didn't want a throne. He didn't want headlines. But he understood now. The bracelet was not just a clue, it was a key. He could open doors no one else could. A month later, Cairo quietly founded a non-profit using the offshore funds. He called it Project Horizon. The mission? Rebuild communities torn apart by war, starting with Vantara. No photos, no name, just anonymous donations that changed lives. Schools, water systems, technology centers. Cairo coded while the world healed, quietly, powerfully. When journalists traced the mystery donor, they found nothing. Cairo erased every breadcrumb. It was never about credit. At home, Margaret watched the news and smiled. She never asked for details. She only said, "You always knew, didn't you?" He nodded. "Not who I was, but what I needed to become. And slowly, a boy once abandoned in silence became the voice behind progress, not for power, but for peace. Cairo's work spread like wildfire, though his name never did. Across regions once considered unreachable, communities were rising again. Clean water stations replaced rusted pumps. Internet learning hubs emerged in rural villages. Hospitals reopened with solar power and medicine stockpiles. In the heart of Vantara, a restored school bore no founder's name, only a plaque, to the children of tomorrow. Back in the cottage, Margaret tended her garden, unaware that the boy she raised had become a silent force reshaping lives across the globe. Cairo returned every few weeks, eating her soup, fixing her porch light, folding laundry. To her, he was still just Cairo. Then, one day, a letter arrived from a United Nations development arm, encrypted, confidential. They requested a speaker for the Youth Peace and Impact Summit. We believe you are the man behind the movement. The world deserves to hear your message, even if your identity remains private. Cairo hesitated. Spotlight was never his goal. But maybe, just once, his voice could reach someone else searching for identity. He said yes, on one condition: no face, no name. At the summit, he stood behind a frosted screen. His voice, deep and steady, rang out. I was raised by someone who taught me love doesn't ask where you're from. I was called a mistake. But she saw a beginning. Backstage, a UN rep approached him after the applause. If you ever want to visit Vantara's new government, they'd welcome you. You could run for office. Cairo smiled gently. I'm not a kingmaker, he said. I'm a gardener. I'm just planting seeds. He left the hall with no pictures, no press, only purpose. Spring arrived gently in the small town where Margaret still lived. One afternoon, Cairo returned home, dressed simply, carrying groceries and new soil for the garden. Margaret looked up from her porch chair, a cup of tea in hand. I saw a headline today, she said casually, about a mystery benefactor rebuilding a hospital in Cairo province. He chuckled. I like the irony. She smirked. Still my boy, right? Always. They sat together, listening to birdsong and distant laughter from playing children. Cairo rested his head on her shoulder, and for a moment, the whole world felt quiet. He had spent years chasing answers, decoding secrets, and hiding from the spotlight. But here, with her, there was no need to explain anything. Margaret never once asked about the money, or the files, or Kamari Ayatu. Her love was never tied to titles or legacy. She had saved a boy who didn't know who he was, and raised a man who finally did. Across the world, the seeds Cairo planted were blooming. But here, in Margaret's garden, was the root of it all. I started a program in Vantara, he told her softly, named it after Dad's old plan, but with better people. She nodded, her eyes full. I'm proud of you. You made me. No, she said. You made yourself. I just gave you a place to start. That night, they sat by the fire, sharing cocoa and silence. No fame, no camera, just love. Cairo smiled at the bracelet still on his wrist. It was never just a clue, it was a compass, and it had finally brought him home. Cairo expanded Project Horizons slowly, deliberately. No flashy headlines, no corporate boards, just a team of quiet believers committed to change. They worked with local leaders, not over them. They listened. They learned, and because of that, the work lasted. In the ruins of Vantara's past, schools rose. Libraries opened. Youth centers became places of hope, not fear. Refugees returned, not because of politics, but because of dignity. Cairo trained local programmers, funded teachers, and restored water sources with clean, tech-driven designs. And still, no one knew his face. He stayed in the shadows by choice, not out of fear, but out of clarity. This wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing others. During a rare visit to a school in rural Vantara, a child handed him a note. It read, "Thank you for not forgetting us." He didn't reply with words. He smiled, handed the boy a solar-powered learning tablet, and disappeared before press could arrive. Back at the cottage, Margaret kept knitting sweaters for neighbors' babies, never seeking recognition either. She knew her boy had become something extraordinary. And yet, he still returned home like clockwork, same smile, same quiet, same cocoa before bed. He once told her, "The world is loud, but here, it's safe." She understood. Because love isn't loud, it's steady. Years passed. Cairo never revealed his name, but whispers of his impact grew. In Geneva, they called him the Invisible Builder. In Vantara, they called him the Returned Heir. But to Margaret, he was still the boy with the blue eyes and a cloth bracelet. The last time she saw him, he was kneeling in the garden, planting daffodils beside her porch. "Spring is early this year," she said. He smiled. "So is change." That night, he flew to a summit where world leaders would discuss peaceful tech deployment. His speech was never broadcast, but those in the room remembered every word. He ended with this: "You don't need to be known to matter. You just need to matter to someone." Margaret passed peacefully one autumn morning, with a framed photo of Cairo as a baby on her bedside table. At her funeral, no dignitaries came, no photographers. Just neighbors, cats, and the distant laughter of children playing on a newly built playground, funded anonymously. Cairo buried her beneath a tree they planted together years ago. A brass plaque read, "Raised by love, returned by legacy." Each spring the tree blossoms, yellow, bright, alive. And somewhere, a man with blue eyes and a silent history plants another seed. Not for power, not for pride, but for peace.